killing time waiting on you, Brandon. No, I'm just kidding. I know a lot of people have kind of asked me about the PowerPoints and stuff like this. As I was mentioning with the cross-examine and being trained with them and all this other sort of stuff, you know, some of these PowerPoints I've received from them, some of them I've, you know, kind of put in my own stuff and da-da-da. So I need to contact them to make sure there's no copyright issues. I don't mind passing those along to you. I'd be happy to do that. I just want to make sure I don't overstep my bounds. So if you would like the PowerPoints, send me an email. I'll give you my email real quick. Just send me an email, and then I'll do some research, talk to those guys, and then if it's okay, I'll just shoot it all to you. Because like I said, it's like part mine, part theirs now anyways. So my email is Dyer, D-Y-E-R. That's right. 84@gmail.com. So the actual numbers 8 and 4. W. Dyer 84, because I was born in 1984. W. Dyer 84@gmail.com.
Is there a dot? Is there a period after the W?
Nope, just wdyer84@gmail.com.
You said that's D-Y-R-E?
D-Y-E-R. No lie, I'm talking to, I think it was like somebody with like car insurance or something. No, oh no, this sort of was. So, I'm engaged, right? We're getting married. So like a couple months ago, we're like planning this wedding thing, right? And I'm calling up this place, and I'm having to give them my name because we want to set up an appointment. We're thinking about doing this as our venue. And she goes, well, what's your name? And I said, all right, my name is William, or my name was Dyer, and I went D, and she goes, how do you spell that? I was like, D, yeah, I was like, I don't know how else to spell that. What is wrong with you? But anyways, all right. Morning to me. You guys ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. Who wrote the Gospels? As we said before, I just want to reiterate that when you come across skeptics, just remember, they are not always honest. That does not mean just because somebody's not a Christian that they are a liar and that all Christians are telling the truth. Just be wary that Satan does have influence on those. The Bible does say that Satan blinds the minds of the unbelieving. That skeptics are not always honest in their objections, and you're going to see that as we go through some of these objections. But I want to start off with the scripture verse, Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you your elders, and they will tell you. It's important that we pass down the tradition of the scriptures. This is our buddy Bart Ehrman, in case you didn't know what he looked like. Try to pick a very unflattering picture of him. He says this in Jesus Interrupted. Some books, such as the Gospels, have been written anonymously, only later to be ascribed to certain authors who probably did not write them, apostles and friends of the apostles. So, he says here, hey look man, your Gospels, they're anonymous. You think they're written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but they're not. They're anonymous. They were written by people centuries later. Didn't even meet Jesus. Alright? So that's what your boy Bart says. Richard Dawkins, God Delusion, says the Gospel is not reliable accounts of what happened in the history of the real world. All were written long after the death of Jesus, and also after the epistles of Paul, which mention almost none of the alleged facts of Jesus' life. Now, think back to your Bible knowledge. Does Paul mention anything about the fact of Jesus' life?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's not really honest. I don't know what Bible he's reading. But I would also like to point out that I would like to think that the Gospels were written after the death of Jesus, since they record the death of Jesus. So thank you for that one. Way to go, Sherlock. Nobody knows who the four evangelists were, but they almost certainly never met Jesus personally. Now, this guy is a biologist at Oxford. Not a theologian, not a historian, not a scholar on history. So, just because a guy has a PhD doesn't mean he is a doctor on everything. Stick to biology, and you're not even good at that one, Dawkins, but at least stick to that one, okay? And get out of the field of history and philosophy because you really don't know what you're talking about. We're assessing genuineness of the Gospels, and we're going to kind of go through these different tests right here. The tests are this. Attributions of authorship. That is, what are other documents saying about our documents? What are other documents saying about what we call the Gospels? Early use in other works. Again, this helps us to date when they were written. Because you can't quote something, right, if it's not written. But if you're quoting it, that means it's already written. Integration with other historical sources. That is, how do the Gospels match up with other historical sources and what they say about what's happening in the political and historical environment of their times. Internal tests. This is when we take the Gospels and point them at each other. Overall consistency. Do the Gospels contradict one another? That's what we're going to answer. Undesigned coincidences. That's a really cool one. Sometimes you'll read something in Matthew and it'll raise some questions in your mind, like, well, he gives me some of the details of the story, but something's left out, and then you'll see other Gospels fill in those details. We're going to tell you why that one actually points to the reliability of Scriptures. And then other marks of authenticity. So let's hit this first one, the attributions of authorship. Early attestation of authorship. We got a few guys who are early church fathers, 207 AD down to 125 AD. Now Jesus was crucified, let's say around 30 AD. The apostles lived, up into the 60s. John probably lived close to 90 AD. That's my thoughts. All right? And that's just not me. There's plenty of scholars who would agree with me on that. So these guys are not that far removed. Okay? Next generation or two right afterwards. And remember, our buddy Bart Ehrman wants us to believe that the Gospels were written far after the fact. They're written in the 3rd and 4th century. But here's something that I haven't pointed out, but he also wants us to believe. There were, a Baskin-Robbins sort of, flavors of Christianity in the 1st century. 1st and 2nd century. And it just so happens that what we call orthodox was the one that won out. But there was all these other dissenting views about what was really orthodox. And it just so happens that our version won out, and therefore that's why you believe what you believe. Okay? So we're going to kind of test that as well. Here's what Tertullian tells us. The Gospels were written by Matthew and John, the apostles. Luke and Mark, who were apostolic men. Mark's Gospel is the record of Peter's preaching. See, I told you we were going to talk about that. They tell the same basic facts about Jesus. Wouldn't you agree? You read the 4 Gospels, they seem to tell the basic facts about Jesus. Virgin birth and his fulfillment of prophecy. They bore the names of their authors. Note that. From what? From antiquity. He's writing 207. He's writing like 150 years later. And he's saying, look, we call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because that's what antiquity calls it. You only got 150 years to play with, right? So he's telling us the ancients already called them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the ancient churches like Rome and Ephesus, right? The big major ones. Vouch for them and no others. Pretty good. Well, let's move back even further. Clement of Alexandria tells us, Mark wrote his gospel by Peter's knowledge, preaching at Rome. Matthew and Luke were published first. I don't necessarily know if that's true or not, but hey, that's what he's saying. They are the Gospels contained in the genealogies. John's Gospel was the last one to appear. It was written at the urging of his friends. Most people believe John wrote the Gospel last. There's no question about that. Matthew's Gospel, this is Irenaeus, was the first one written. It was originally written in the Hebrew dialect. Again, some scholars believe that, others don't. But still, we see consistent details is what I'm trying to point out. Mark, disciple of Peter, another consistent detail. We've read other people who said the same thing. Luke, a companion of Paul. Now we get a little bit more detail about Luke. Records the gospel preached by him. John, the disciple of the Lord, published the gospel while living at Ephesus in Asia. The Muratorian fragment, you can actually go Google this and read it online. Take you all of like 7 to 10 minutes at most. The first part's broken off, but pretty much every scholar agrees it's talking about Matthew and Mark. Here's why. Because it picks up and says, and the third one is Luke, and the fourth one is John. So most scholars will go, well, he was probably talking about Matthew and Mark. Luke, the physician and companion of Paul, we've read that before, wrote his Gospels from the reports of others, since he had not personally seen Jesus. John, who was an eyewitness, wrote his Gospel after the rest. Again, consistent details, right? 170. Justin Martyr. Christians possess memoirs. What are memoirs? Well, they're called Gospels. Oh, okay, that clears that up, right? These were written by the apostles and those who were their followers. Same thing we read other places. They tell us of such events as the visit of the Magi and the agony of Jesus in Gethsemane. Question, what gospel tells us about the Magi? Only one gospel, which one?
Matthew.
Matthew, okay, so he's implying Matthew there. And then the agony in Gethsemane, which one? Nope.
Luke.
Luke. So here we have here, they tell us, and he says Matthew and Luke. All right, and here we got 150. Not the 4th century, Bart, 150 AD. Justin's pupil Tatian produced a harmony of the 4 Gospels, the diatessaron. That's simply a Greek word that means through 4. Which 4? Well, we would say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but your German theologians would come and cry, well, it can't possibly be those because we know that they were written later, especially the Gospel of John. There's no way. Well, here's what's funny. We actually found, we didn't have a copy of this until the 19th century, so we had no idea what the diatessaron said. But then, like God is always good, we found a copy. Right? And you got these German theologians who are running around, these liberal skeptics running around and saying, there's no way it's talking about those 4 Gospels because they're anonymous and definitely not John, da-da-da-da-da. You want to know how this document starts off? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came into being through Him. Nothing came into being apart from Him. And God confounded the wise people of our age. Papias, 125 AD. Mark having been the interpreter of Peter. Again, consistent detail. Matthew wrote the Logia in the Hebrew dialect, Hebrew language. There again, consistent details. 125. This is the turn into the 2nd century. That's extremely close. Now here's what's cool. Clement, Alexandria. Papias, Hierapolis. Tertullian, over here in Carthage. Irenaeus and Leon. You can't get further apart than that in the Roman Empire. And these guys didn't have Twitter. And they didn't have Facebook, and they didn't have text messaging, and they didn't have email. They could not talk to one another. You can't get further apart. So we have this not only consistent details, but consistent details. It's like they go, the skeptics will say, all the Christians got together, and they just, got together and had a conspiracy about all this and said, well, these are the 4 Gospels. Where they meet? Maybe over here, random island, maybe over there in Crete or something. Like, where'd they meet? They're spread out all over the Roman Empire. It's just the things you have to come up with to be an atheist. So, we got a summary of the facts. There's no rival tradition, Bart, of authorship for any of the 4 Gospels. I just showed you that the early church all attested to what we call the 4 Gospels and then named them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And like Tertullian said, the reason why we call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is because that's what the ancient churches told us. These are the guys who wrote it. So, doesn't really seem well for the objection that Bart put out. So very strong and consistent there. This goes against every rule of PowerPoint, but I just have to show it to you. All right, so let me step out of the way in case you guys want to see this. This is a chart of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then these are what we call like pseudonymous Gospels, right? Sometimes you'll watch the History Channel and you hear about the Gospel of Peter, or the Gospel of Thomas. If you actually take a moment to read those, you'll see how absolutely ridiculous they are, and they don't even compare to what we read about in the life of Jesus here, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. Now, you got Ignatius, Polycarp, Marcion, who was a heretic, Valentinius, who was a heretic, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement, Tertullian, Meritonian Fragment, Origen, Eusebius, Codus Satanicus, what was that guy's name? Like Athanasius something. Hold up, I got it written down here for you. Athanasius, Didymus the Blind, the Bushido, and the Vulgate. I remembered most of them. Now, if you just start off Ignatius and Polycarp, which is like, right, Polycarp was a disciple of John, the Apostle. Okay? So he's 1 generation removed. You already have the 4 Gospels, because a check mark means they referred to that Gospel, so Ignatius referred to Matthew, and he affirms this is a Gospel. A dot means they just don't talk about it. And a check mark with a slash means that Marcion mentions Luke, so Luke was around, but he doesn't like Luke. So he only uses part of Luke, but doesn't like the rest of Luke. Okay, so he kind of uses his highlighter, his little Sharpie highlighter, and crosses out a bunch of Luke. And X means that they repudiate the whole work. So Marcion repudiates John, repudiates Acts. Well, here's what we find. If we just go to Ignatius and Polycarp, we already got the 4 Gospels mentioned, right? Because Polycarp mentions Mark, and Ignatius mentions John, and they both mention the other ones. So there we got the 4 Gospels in Acts, right there at the turn of the 2nd century. But if you look at the rest of these guys, even the heretics help us to realize these guys are already around. And you look at the rest of our sources, they're all checked. What about our pseudo-gospels? So when somebody goes, what about those other gospels that didn't make it in the gospel, that didn't make it in the Bible? What do you say? What about them? There's a reason. Look at this. Look at the scantness of that. I mean, this is overwhelming evidence. Early use in other works, overwhelming. Bart Ehrman on Matthew's description of Matthew. Matthew's gospel is written completely in the third person. Even when his gospel narrates the event of Matthew being called to become a disciple, it talks about him, not me. So, Matthew 9:9, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me," and he rose and followed him. So he's saying, well, of course, if Matthew wrote it, he would use the first person, right? Well, that's a very old argument, which is, again, why I think he's not being honest. Around the year 400, Augustine encountered this very argument from a Manichaean named Faustus. Faustus was one of the first ones to ever deny or try to attack the authenticity of the Gospels in the sense that Matthew wrote Matthew and Mark wrote Mark, okay? And this is what Augustine says. It's pretty cool. Faustus thinks himself wonderfully clever in proving that Matthew is not the writer of this Gospel because when speaking of his own election, he says, he saw me and he said to me, follow me, but he saw him and said to him, follow me. So this is exactly what Bart says. Oh, he uses the third person, not the first person, right? Faustus used that same argument in 400 AD. And here's what Augustus says. This must have been said either in ignorance or from a design to mislead. Faustus can hardly be so ignorant as to have not read or heard that narrators, when speaking of themselves, often use a construction as if speaking of another. It is more probable that Faustus wished to bewilder those more ignorant than himself in the hope of getting hold on not a few unacquainted with these things. Yeah, he just threw down. Essentially, Augustus said, he can't be that stupid, he must just be a deceiver. And in fact, Xenophon here writes the same way. There was in the army a certain Xenophon, an Athenian, who accompanied the army, da-da-da-da-da. He uses it, and so do other ancient authors. So, for Bart Ehrman, who is a guy who knows like 5-6 languages, who's got a PhD, I mean, he knows better. He's just being a liar about this. I can't imagine him not knowing this.
He doesn't understand humility.
Yeah, probably doesn't.
If a man to stumble, he'd say it the way it's written.
Yeah.
John doesn't mention himself by name.
That's right.
In his holy gospel.
Mm-hmm.
That's humility.
Yeah.
He was a former Baptist minister.
Yeah, former Baptist minister. Turned apostate. In fact, if you read his books, he'll write all this stuff about how the gospel's been changed. But here's what's cool. At the end of one of his books, and I can't remember which one, it was either misquoting Jesus or Jesus interrupted. Literally, I was blown away. Blown away that he had this like candid moment. He goes, you know, I went through seminary and I did this and I saw the historical critical method and these discrepancies and this and that. He goes, but none of that led to my abandonment of faith. And he literally said, the thing that made me leave, my belief in God and my faith in Christianity was the problem of evil. Why would a good God allow all these bad things to happen? And I was like, highlight, highlight, highlight. All the rest of it is a smokescreen. All the rest of it is a smokescreen. And see, that's what I was talking about earlier. That's an emotional rejection of God, not an intellectual one. Because, I'll get to you, George. Because essentially philosophers basically have already worked out, have already shown us that there is no philosophical argument that can't combine a good God and the evil we have in this world. Like, you can't make that argument, okay? So essentially that argument is now scrapped by atheists because it's already been, the philosophers are just taking them to task for it. George, did you have something?
We had a boy that came here to school. We all loved him. A girl came here and he was attracted to her and asked her for a date. She wouldn't do it. And she married someone else. This boy had written a wonderful book, the book of the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
He was so angry at God that girl didn't go for him. He is now an atheist.
It's an emotional rejection.
Yeah.
What I was saying about the problem of evil, I was trying to think of the guy's name. Alvin Plantinga. He's at Notre Dame. He is probably one of the probably the leading Christian philosopher in our day. And he essentially, in this little book, but is like the most technical thing, so I wouldn't even suggest it. Like, you'll never ever use it. But essentially, this was his book. It's like God, pain, or God, problem, and evil, God, pain, and evil, something like that. It's a little book, but it's high formal logic. If P, then Q, and all that sort of stuff. And I was just, whew. But that's that's him taking the task and essentially from his studies of that, and philosophers have given up that, well, we can't really point to the problem of evil and say that there is no God. Okay? All right. How about this one? In Matthew, there's not a word about Jesus being God. In John, that's precisely who he is. So he's trying to show some inconsistencies here. Okay, think back. In the Gospel of Matthew, does Matthew ever allude to Jesus being God?
How about God with us?
How about God with us? What else?
The high priest adjured him in Matthew, was it?
Yep.
That's on the road.
There's the two Bible theologians in the back for us. Matthew 1:3, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. He's alluding here to Isaiah 9:6. For a child is born to us, a son is given, the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. So right at the beginning of the Gospel. Matthew 3:3, for this is the one spoken of by the prophet Isaiah when he said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. This is a quote of Isaiah 43. And notice that right here we have a word that the Jews would not say. Why would they not say it? Because it was the proper name of God. So they would substitute Adonai in there. So here we have an allusion that John the Baptist is to prepare the way of the Lord, God the Father. And this is used in Isaiah 43, talking about God the Father. And so Matthew says here that Jesus was the one John the Baptist was preparing the way for. Direct connection to Jesus being God. Matthew 9:2-6, when Jesus saw their faith, he's talking about the paralytic. Remember, he was let down in the ceiling. Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven. Behold, some of the scribes said to themselves, this man is blaspheming. So that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He told him to pick up his bed and go home. Who has authority to forgive sins? What other prophet in the Old Testament ever took that right for himself? The Pharisees were exactly right. Who is this man to have the audacity to take the rights of God for himself? Well, their mistake was Jesus wasn't just a man. So, overall consistency here, so far, so good. External evidences for the truth of the Gospels and Acts. Good. We're making good time on this one. I like it. 2 Peter 1:16. For we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. I like that. Because Peter says, look, I didn't follow fairy tales. I saw this with my very own eyes. Now, by the way, so this lecture and then tomorrow morning's lecture is essentially like a 5-hour thing I cut down into like a 2-hour thing. So I just point that out to say there's a lot more in these different things that we're talking about. Right here, I got this map for you. This is what we're going to go through. Okay, you got external, and this is what we're starting with right here. External evidence, non-Christian sources, and incidental confirmations. This is positive evidence. This is where the Gospels say something, and we read something in another ancient source, and we go, wow, the Gospel writers actually knew the real historical and political situation of what was going on. Okay? Then we get here, undesigned coincidences. This is what I was saying earlier about how the Gospels, there's no way they got together and copied each other because these things are so just interwoven, it's just not possible. Objections, this is the negative aspect. Historical error, so this is where people will go, well, Mark obviously wasn't familiar with Palestine's geography because look at what he said here. Or Matthew can't possibly be familiar with this part of what's going on with Rome because look what he says there. And we're going to answer those objections. The fourth one is contradictions in the Gospels. Well, Matthew says this and Mark says that. How many angels were at the tomb? 1 or 2? Was it an angel or was it a man? How many women were at the tomb? 1, 2, 5? How many? Did the women see the stone rolled away by the angel or did they not? See, these are the questions that you're going to have, right? So we're going to talk about that as well. Like I said, 5 hours of material down in 2. I think we can make it because I cut a bunch of stuff out. So just to let you know, there's even more evidence than what I'm giving you. Pretty sweet, right? All right. 2 types of external evidence. We can look in the non-Christian sources for confirmation of major events like the crucifixion. But that's okay. I mean, that's like okay evidence because we'll read something in Josephus or another guy to go, yeah, Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That helps us, but it only really brings out the broad outlines of the gospel story. The other way is we look in the Gospels and Acts for incidental allusions that reveal the author's knowledge of the setting and the truthfulness in recounting matters of detail. That is, you can see those guys were so familiar with the situation that was going on in the first century. There's no way they made it up. They had to be eyewitnesses. And so I'll give you examples. Two non-Christian writers that we're going to talk about, Tacitus and Josephus. Anybody ever heard of those two guys? Tacitus, Roman historian, Josephus, Jew who turned into Rome historian. Okay. Not inspired, but still good historians that can help confirm the Gospels. Tacitus, we can kind of skip over this, but he was a Roman senator, historian, born around 56 AD, so when Paul's writing his letters, this is when this guy's born. He says this about the fire of Rome in AD 64. Consequently, to get rid of the report, all right, because here's what happened. There was some slums in Rome that Nero was trying to get rid of, so he can kind of build up some stuff for himself. And the people didn't want him to. Well, then a fire broke out and burned all the slums down. How convenient. And so, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, which is a Latinization of the Greek word Christos, which means Christ, from whom had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty, that's a crucifixion, during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, a most mischievous superstition. Now, we don't know what he means by mischievous superstition, but put yourself in the shoes of a Roman, and you have a group of Christians who are saying a man rose from the dead. Seems pretty superstitious, doesn't it?
Eating his body and drinking his blood.
Well, we're going to get to that too. But I think that he's probably referring to the resurrection there. Can't be sure, just my opinion. But he says, thus they checked for the moment. The movement was checked for the moment, right? When they killed Jesus, it kind of stopped it. But then it broke out again, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Isn't that what the Bible says? That the gospel spread to Rome? And then he says, an arrest was first made on all who pleaded guilty, that is, guilty of being Christians, not guilty of any crime. Upon their information, a vast multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of fire in the city, as of hatred against mankind. Why does he say that Christians hated mankind? What were Christians doing that would make the pagans think that we hated people? Two things.
Talking about the destruction of the world.
What was that?
He kept talking about the destruction of the world.
Yeah, that could be possible. That might be it. Maybe three.
All these sinners.
Oh, yeah. That could be it.
Preaching against their gods.
Yeah, all that's true. One thing that Christians did is they actually pulled back a lot from the, I would say, kind of entertainment of society,
Yeah.
especially like the Colosseums and stuff. They kind of refused to go because it wasn't just entertainment. I mean, it was like death of human beings. So, you know, the pagans are like, what's wrong with you guys? Okay. The second thing is we had this charge against us that we were cannibals. Why would they charge us with that? Because we would eat flesh and drink blood every Sunday. Well, that's the rumor that went out. All right. So that's probably what he means against hatred against mankind, because we were charged with being cannibals. So from Tacitus, we know that there's a group of Christians. They started from some guy named Christus. He was executed under Pontius Pilate during Tiberius' reign. The Romans considered the Christians superstitious. We were hated, performing abominations. It originated in Judea, spread to Rome. By 64, there was a vast multitude of them in Rome. Flavius Josephus, all right? He was a Jew who, when the Romans were coming to surround Jerusalem, he defected to their side, tried to convince his brothers and sisters to come over as well. Most of them did not, and we know about the destruction of Jerusalem, but he was hailed as a hero afterwards, and this is when he wrote his letters, The Jewish War of Antiquities. He says this about John the Baptist. Now, some of the Jews thought the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly, as a punishment of what he did against John, that was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, who was a good man. Herod, who feared lest the great influence that John had over the people might put it into his power and inclination to raise a rebellion. Now, he says here that Herod put John to death because he's scared that he might start a movement against Herod. What does the Bible say, though? Why was John the Baptist put to death? Yeah, he said, look, man, it's not lawful for you to take your brother's wife. Okay, so we got a little conflicting detail there, but that's okay. Accordingly, he was sent to a prison out of Herod's suspicious temper to Macarius, the castle I before mentioned, and it was there put to death. Now, you compare these, and in Matthew and in Mark, they tell us the story of Herod Antipas, execution of John the Baptist. We already talked about the descent. But here's the question I have. How should the gospel writers know what Herod's motives were? Now we could say, oh, they were inspired by God. Well, that's an easy answer for us, but doesn't do much for somebody who might be questioning the Gospels. There's a better answer.
They saw
Josephus
what was
didn't
going
write till
on.
93 A.D.
What'd you say?
Josephus never wrote till 93 A.D. He wasn't there.
So here's a good point. Why do we doubt the Gospels and not Josephus? How come Josephus might not have got the motive wrong? Maybe they were both right. Maybe there was multiple motives. Okay, so let's just say, for example, both were right. The question is, how do the Gospel writers know what Herod was thinking?
The disciples went to Jesus to talk to him about John the Baptist when he was in prison.
So God directly told him? Maybe. Maybe that's it. Look at this little detail in Luke. Joanna, the wife of Huzzah, Herod's household manager. Jesus' followers had a family in the higher ranks of Herod's employment. I think that's pretty reasonable. To think you got a household manager of Herod, and she probably knows the gossip that's going around the castle. And she's able to tell the disciples, this is why John the Baptist was put to death. I think that's reasonable. I don't see any reason why not. I mean, if you work with church people long enough, you know they talk about each other. Right? So, why wouldn't the pagans do the same thing?
I think he might have tried to defend himself in writing and give an explanation of wrong why he did it.
Probably could be true.
Don't mention embarrassing facts.
Yeah, right? All right, another detail about John's death. According to Mark 6:27, Herod sent a military officer, a speculator, to execute John the Baptist. Question, why would he not send the typical civil executioner? Generally, they would send the civil guy. Why did he send a military commander to kill John the Baptist?
Because he wasn't guilty of any civil crime.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, though. So this is what I'm talking about. This is where we learn about something in the Gospels, but then we learn about something in history, and we go, what's going on? And this is where the history can kind of help us to say the Gospels actually knew what they were talking about. According to Josephus, Herod was at war with his former father-in-law. Why was he at war with him? Because when Herod decided, I'm going to take my brother's wife, his first wife didn't really like that too much. And so his first wife said, I'm going home to Daddy. And went home to Daddy, and you think Daddy took the news well. And Daddy's like, no, I don't like that at all. So Daddy started a war with Herod. And Herod was then at his castle, and he was set up in this. This is the ruins of the castle, there on the Dead Sea. This is what it used to look like. So he was at war at this time. Pretty cool when you see kind of the historical backdrop of it, don't you think? All right, a curious detour. When Joseph, I really like this one. All right, when Joseph heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. Now, this was Herod the Great, and remember, Herod the Great was the one when Jesus was born, and they say, oh, there's a king of the Jews who was born. Oh, where is he at? I want to worship him, but really I want to kill him. Okay, and then he makes a command for what to happen. Kill the babies 2 years old and younger, right? So that way we can just take care of it. So I want to kill all those. Well, what happens with Joseph and Mary? When they hear about this news, what do? They flee to Egypt, right? And then they receive a message, Herod's dead, and they decide they're going to come up back into Judea. Now, it's very typical, right? It's only natural that his eldest son, Archelaus, would take the throne. I mean, you don't use any common sense. Anybody knows anything about history knows, generally, you pass it down to your eldest son, right? That's the next to reign. So there would have been no surprise here for Joseph to go, oh no, Archelaus is reigning. I didn't know that was going to happen. We got to get around that. But why is it that he was afraid to go there and he withdrew to the district of Galilee? See, we get this detail in Matthew, but we don't really know why he was afraid. So Herod the Great had died, right? And Archelaus has taken his place. Herod the Great, here's what happened. So Herod set up some symbols of the Romans, which were eagles, on the temple walls, right? Now, you think the Jews took kindly to that? No. Why? It's their temple, but think about the Ten Commandments. You shall not have any graven images. So they kind of took offense to that. So they sent some young Jewish boys to go take the things down. Herod finds out about it, figures out who did it, got the boys, and executed them. You think that went over well with the Jews? No. But then Herod dies, and his son Archelaus has taken his place, not long before March of 4 BC, when hundreds of thousands of Jews made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Right? Now here's what's funny. At the Passover, there's still this tension going on. And there was a clash between some of the angry Jews in the temple and a group of Roman soldiers. Now generally soldiers would win out. But why did these soldiers not win out? Because Josephus tells us there's a few million Jews who are now surrounding or in the area of Jerusalem for the Passover. This is probably where Josephus kind of makes things a little bit extravagant. Probably not a few million Jews, but let's just say 500,000. Okay, pretty conservative number there. Even if it was 200,000, that's still a lot of people. And you get that many people who are coming to the temple precincts, and you don't have that many soldiers. So the mob bum rushes the soldiers and kills some of the soldiers. Now, you're Archelaus. You're a brand new ruler, and you just had some of your military men mobbed and killed. Do you want to look like a weak ruler? You got, not to Rome exactly. And you got to get this thing in check, because if this thing breaks out, Rome's coming down on you. So in panic, Archelaus sends a troop of armed horsemen to surround the temple with orders not to let anyone out and not to let anybody in. Surround the temple, shut it down. He goes in and he kills 3,000 Jews. And then here's the kicker. Passover is canceled. That's like canceling Easter. I mean, even worse, right? I mean, you just canceled Passover? You got all these hundreds of thousands, maybe even a million Jews who are now fleeing Jerusalem. And there were a lot of Jews in this day who were living in Alexandria, Egypt. So, where are Joseph and Mary coming from? Coming from Egypt. And you think they're going to be on some random back road? No, they're going to be on the same route. And they're going to see these Jews. What are you guys doing? Passover's still happening. Why are you coming back? You'll never believe. Let me tell you what Archelaus did. And they say this. Okay, so we left Judea because there was a homicidal maniac on the throne killing people. We're coming back to Judea and there's a homicidal maniac on the throne. I think I'll go somewhere else. Pretty reasonable, right? Seems as if the Gospels got their details right. The denarius. I love this story. I love this story because it shows that Jesus, regardless of what you think about him, which is cool, he's just awesome. Because no matter what you think about him, you've got to come away from the Gospels and realize this is one of the wisest men ever to walk the face of the planet. Now, of course, we think he is the wisest. But even if you're a skeptic and you read the Gospels, just look at his interactions with people when they try to confront him about things. He totally demolishes their arguments. That's why at the end it says that nobody dared ask him any more questions once they put him through that gauntlet of questions. But this one's one of my favorite. So they ask him, should we pay taxes? You know, now they think they got a foolproof plan, right? I mean, they're like, we sat down, we worked this one out. We got this one, we got him in a trap. Because what's the problem? If he says, yeah, pay your taxes, what can the Pharisees now say? Oh, you're like those traitor tax collectors, huh? Rome's extorting us with all these double tax systems, and you're going to tell us to pay. You want Rome to rule over us. You're not a faithful Jew. Oh, yeah, don't pay taxes. What do they say now?
Hey, Rome, he's encouraging us not to pay taxes.
Hey, Pontius, you got a guy over here starting an insurrection saying don't pay your taxes to Rome. They got him. What does Jesus do? This is why you got to love Jesus. Show me a denarius. Whose likeness in the inscription does it have? They said Caesar's. I can just imagine them at this time. You know, sometimes you read over this fast. They're like waiting for his answer. Which one is he going to do? A or B? A or B? A or B? I think he's going to do B. Well, I think he's going to do A. All right, I'll place a bet on it, right? And then Jesus says, let me see a denarius. Whose inscription's on it? And they probably were like, uh-oh. This is not going according to plan. Abort mission. Caesar's. Like, where is this going? And he says to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. What is he saying? Pull up. This is a coin, right? This is the image of a denarius. And you probably can't read too much of this writing that's around it. But think about Exodus 20, verse 4. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image or any likeness or anything that's in heaven above or that's on the earth beneath or that's in the water under the earth. Show me a denarius. Whose inscription's on it? Whose graven image is on that coin that you're coveting, Pharisee? Whose likeness is that? Oh, that's Caesar's. Interesting. Well, give to Caesar the things that bear his image. Give to God the things that bear his, which is what? In the beginning, we were created in the image of God. That's awesome. Give to God yourself. Give to Rome their money. Why are you coveting something that even breaks your own commandments? But let's go a step further. Sometimes most people get this. Sometimes we miss the next one. This one's even cooler. On it says Augustus, and this is like shorthand for basically Augustus Tiberius Caesar, the divine Augustus. This is the imperial cult of Rome. Okay? This is emperor worship. This is what the Romans thought of the emperor. He is the divine. This is why Paul says in Corinthians, for us there is only one Lord. Although for others there's many lords. You shall have no other gods before me. Not only does it have Caesar's image on it, you're coveting something that has a graven image on it, but the inscription around it calls him the divine Lord. You're breaking two of your commandments with this coin. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, to God the things that are God's. Isn't that awesome? That to me, that's awesome. And the Gospels get it exactly right. Exactly right as far as what the coins were like in the first century at this time, what the inscriptions were on them, what their writings were on them, they get it exactly right. Colin Himmer, the book of Acts, he says this, pages 108 through 158, he goes through the last 16 chapters, this is what I was telling you about earlier. He lists 84 of those details, that's what we were mentioning earlier. Talks about ports and boundaries and landmarks and slang terminology, that's another one. You're using the correct terminology of these little podunk towns, local languages and deities and industries. So I'll give you a couple here. The governor of Cyprus is called a proconsul, anthropotos, while the magistrates of Philippi were strategoids, governors. And those of Thessalonica are simply politarchi, rulers. The chief executive magistrates in Ephesus are grammatus, town clerks. And the ruler of Malta is called simply a protos, which means first, like first of a kind. Protos simply means first. So you're first of a kind. You're first in the line of people. You're the chief man. And wouldn't that make sense? You go to some little place on Malta, you just got some tribe of people. They don't have some sort of like really cool fancy title for them. They don't have a big government. They just call him the chief dude. Take me to your leader. Right? And Luke gets all those terms right. Do you think if I asked you about town clerks in Louisiana, you would know? Do you think if I asked you about, what a certain school official was called in California, in Orange County, you would know? That's amazing. All right, we'll stop there since it's at our time. And tomorrow we'll do the internal evidences, which is really cool because that's the one where they all interlock. I really like that one. So that's the one where we're going to use our needles, use our Bibles. All right, you got anything there, Terry? Come on down.